Do you remember the excitement you felt as a kid to wake up on Christmas morning and open gifts? Maybe you still get excited. I know I definitely do. Christmas is the best. It's the most wonderful time of the year. I think there's a song about that. But, there's one thing about Christmas that I could do without. Actually, there's one thing in life that I could really do without. I don't like it very much, and that's waiting. Maybe you're like me. You don't like to wait. Waiting is one of the hardest things to do, and it's especially the hardest part of following God to me. Now, in the book of Matthew, here, as you know, this is the first book of the New Testament. But if you go back one page, you find yourself in Malachi. This is the last book of the Old Testament. Now, what is just one simple turn of the page to us actually represents 400 years of waiting. 400 years of silence from between where Malachi leaves off and Matthew picks up. There's 400 years of waiting. That means no prophets, no new messages, no new scriptures, no visions, just waiting for 400 years. Have I told you that? 400 years. This is longer than the United States of America has even been a country. Imagine generation after generation never hearing God speak. Your grandparents, your great-grandparents, everyone you know, never hearing a fresh word from heaven. And you can imagine people have started to wonder, did God forget about us? Did the promise expire? Is he ever going to show up? But God's silence is not God's absence. Just because you don't hear him doesn't mean that he is not working. Even the genealogy that you find in Matthew chapter 1 that everyone just tends to skip over, it's really important. Because you see all throughout between Abraham and David, there are 14 generations, and 14 generations between David and Jesus, generation after generation. This just shows us how long God's promise has been in motion. God quietly kept his word, even when his people couldn't see it yet. Now, while everyone thought that nothing was happening, that God took a nap or something, God perfectly was setting the stage for everything. Empires, they rose and they fell. Roads were built that the Messiah and his disciples would travel on later. A common language spread that the gospel would eventually be preached in. The exact moment was being prepared. The perfect circumstances were being prepared for God's greater plan and to fulfill his promise. So for 400 years, after 4 centuries of quiet, heaven finally breaks the silence. And it doesn't happen to a king. It doesn't happen to a priest or anyone of any importance. God sends this message of the Messiah to the lowliest of the low, the lowest of the low. These people that people scoffed at, they laughed at, they mocked, they had nothing, not a dollar to their name, right? So if you flip over to Luke, the Gospel of Luke, this is where you find the Christmas story a little more in depth. And you notice here that before Jesus even arrives on the scene, we meet a couple who understand waiting almost better than anyone, right? And this couple is Elizabeth and Zechariah. And now Scripture says that they were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. These people lived with integrity. They were faithful people. But even faithful people struggle. Even faithful people experience pain. And their pain was deep. Elizabeth and Zechariah, they had no children. And at this point in their lives, they were very old. The Bible literally says they were both very old. It looked like they never would have children. And in their culture, this wasn't just disappointing. This wasn't just devastating for them, but it was also embarrassing. This carried a lot of shame. This carried a lot of confusion. This was years of praying and asking and hoping and hearing nothing. Their prayers just were not being answered, and they wondered if God could even hear them. If anyone needed hope, it was Elizabeth and Zechariah. And then, right in the middle of an ordinary day, while Zechariah is simply doing his priestly duties, God breaks the silence. The drought is over. An angel appears and says words to Zechariah that he probably thought he was well past hearing. He says to Zechariah, "Your prayers have been answered." After all the years of quiet, after all the wondering, God was not late. He was not distracted. He had not forgotten, and hope was still alive. And here's what's beautiful. God didn't just answer their personal prayer to have a son or a daughter, to have a child, right? This son that they were promised to have was like no other child. He was a special child. This child would grow up to be John the Baptist, who was sent with a mission to prepare, to make way for Jesus, the Messiah everyone had been waiting for. Their story wasn't just about them. Their story was part of God's bigger plan. Zechariah and Elizabeth, it shows us, it reminds us that the waiting season shapes us. It deepens us. It prepares us for what God is doing next. Their hope led to John, and John led to Jesus. So throughout Advent, as we go through Advent, this time of anticipation, we go through it with hope. Hope in silence, hope in waiting, and hope in the God who is always moving, always working things out for our good, for his plan and purposes, even when we don't see it yet. Christmas is about unwrapping God's biggest truth in history. I never stopped working.